My son sat down at my kitchen table, folded his hands the way his father used to, and said, "Mom, we need you to sign the retirement accounts over to us, just for safekeeping." He didn't ask. He presented it, like the decision had already been made somewhere I wasn't invited. I was 68 years old. I still drove myself to the grocery store, still grew tomatoes in the backyard, still finished the crossword before my second cup of coffee. But in that moment, the way my son leaned forward with that rehearsed calm in his eyes, I understood something I hadn't let myself see before. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about what might happen to the money before he could reach it. His wife sat beside him, quiet in that deliberate way people are quiet when they've already rehearsed what they plan to say next. She touched the edge of my tablecloth and smiled. "It just makes sense to consolidate things now," she said. "While everything is still straightforward." Straightforward. I poured my coffee slowly and said nothing. They had driven 3 hours to have this conversation. That told me everything. My husband passed 4 years ago. 31 years together, a man who built furniture in the garage on weekends and always burned the pancakes and never once made me feel like a burden. When he died, my son became the person I called in emergencies. That felt natural. What I didn't notice was the moment it shifted, the moment I became something to manage rather than someone to love. I set my mug down. "What exactly does safekeeping mean?" My son glanced at his wife. "Quick," practiced. "Just a transfer of oversight. You'd still have access. We'd just be listed jointly, in case something happens." In case something happens. That phrase, people use it to sound protective when what they mean is, in case you stop being useful. "Nothing has happened," I said. "Not yet," my daughter-in-law replied softly. That word landed like something cold. Not yet. As if my decline were scheduled. As if they had already consulted a calendar. I smiled. I've learned in 68 years that the most powerful response to manipulation is stillness. Not silence, stillness. The kind that makes people fill the space with more of themselves. My son filled it quickly. "Dad would have wanted us to look out for you. His father would have thrown them out of the house." But I kept that thought in my chest where it belonged. "I'll think about it," I said. His shoulders relaxed too soon. He'd heard those words before and thought they meant yes. They didn't. After they left, I stood at the kitchen window and watched their car disappear past the elm tree at the end of the driveway. The tomatoes needed water. The crossword was still on the counter. My life was ordinary and intact, and someone had just tried to tell me it wasn't. I walked to the small desk in the hallway, the one with the scratched surface my husband always meant to refinish. I opened the bottom drawer and took out a legal pad. I wrote the date at the top of the page. Then, I wrote down exactly what had been said, word for word, as best I could remember. Not because I was afraid, because I had learned from 31 years of watching my husband handle difficult people that documentation is not paranoia. It is preparation. Hello, my dear friends. I'm Chloe, and I want to tell you something important before we go any further. No one gets to plan your future without your permission. Not even the people who share your last name. What would you do if the person you trusted most sat down and asked you to hand over everything you'd spent a lifetime building? Keep that question in your heart as I tell you what happened next. The second visit came 6 days later. This time, my son came alone. He walked in carrying takeout from the Thai place I've always liked, which should have felt like kindness but felt like strategy. People bring food when they want the atmosphere softer. We ate at the kitchen table. He asked about the tomatoes. He asked about my neighbor's hip replacement. He asked about the book club I'd been attending for 11 years. And then, between the pad thai and the spring rolls, he said it. I spoke to a financial advisor. I set down my fork. Your financial advisor or mine? He paused. Mine. But he works with family situations like this all the time. Family situations. The phrasing was careful. intentional. He suggested that a joint account structure would actually protect your assets more than individual ownership. My son looked at me with that particular expression, part concern, part persuasion, that I had watched him practice since he was 17 years old, arguing for a later curfew. It's not about control, Mom. It's about protection. Protection from what? He hesitated. From mistakes? From being taken advantage of? By whom? Another hesitation. Longer. People target widows. It happens all the time. I'm aware, I said. That's why I keep my documents locked, and my decisions my own. He exhaled. Not frustrated yet, but close. You're being defensive. I'm being precise, I corrected. He leaned back in his chair, and for a moment, he looked exactly like the boy he used to be. Jaw tight, eyes avoiding mine, searching for a different angle. I felt something ache in my chest. Not weakness. Memory. I remembered teaching him to ride a bicycle in this same driveway. I remembered sitting outside his bedroom door the night his first girlfriend ended things. I remembered the look on his face at his father's funeral, how he'd held himself so carefully because he thought I needed him to. I still loved him. That was never the question. I appreciate that you're concerned, I said gently. But I'm not confused, and I'm not vulnerable. I manage my accounts. I pay my taxes. I make my own appointments. I don't need a co-pilot. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, and picked up his fork again. The subject was dropped, but it wasn't abandoned. I knew the difference. That evening, I called my friend Patricia, who had retired from family law practice 2 years ago. I explained what had been said. She went quiet in that particular way she does when something concerns her. Has he mentioned power of attorney? She asked. Not yet. He will. A pause. Eleanor, you need to talk to someone before this goes any further. Not me, I'm too close. Find an estate attorney. This week. I wrote that down too. The following Tuesday, I drove 40 minutes to an office that smelled of old carpet and fresh printer paper. The attorney was a woman named Dr. Sandra Cho, which I appreciated immediately. She listened without interrupting while I explained everything: the visits, the financial advisor, the phrase, not yet, the joint account suggestion. When I finished, she set down her pen. You haven't signed anything? No. Good. And your current accounts, are they solely in your name? Yes. Everything. She nodded slowly. Here's what I want you to understand. What your son is describing is not unusual for someone with good intentions, but good intentions and sound strategy are not the same thing. Joint accounts give joint access. That is not oversight. That is ownership transfer in practice, regardless of what it's called on paper. I held her gaze. What do I do? We set up a revocable living trust, she said. Your assets go into the trust. You remain the sole trustee. You retain full control. But the structure protects you from informal pressure and makes any external petition extremely difficult to pursue. Petition. The word surfaced something uncomfortable. Is that where this is going? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Not necessarily, but if a family member ever attempted to establish conservatorship to claim you were incapable of managing your own affairs, a properly structured trust significantly limits their ability to do so. She paused. Are there signs they might go that direction? I thought about my daughter-in-law's smile, the word not yet, the financial advisor I didn't hire. Possibly, I said. We scheduled a follow-up for Thursday. I drove home with a folder on the passenger seat and the particular calm that comes from deciding to act rather than wait. The third visit happened before Thursday. My daughter-in-law came alone this time. She arrived unannounced on a Wednesday afternoon carrying a lemon cake from the bakery downtown, the one with the lavender frosting I'd mentioned once at Christmas. She had remembered. That, too, felt deliberate. We sat in the living room. She asked about my sleep, my appetite, whether the backache I'd mentioned in September was still bothering me. Each question soft, concerned. Each one a small brick in a wall I could see being built. "You seem tired," she said, eventually. "I'm not." She tilted her head. "You're running so much on your own." I watched her hands. They rested on her knees, completely still. Practiced stillness. I recognized it because I'd been practicing it myself. "What way would you prefer?" I asked. She smiled gently. "We just want to help carry the load. The accounts, the property management, the medical decisions. My health is fine. For now," she said. And there it was again. That phrase, that small, terrible phrase. I set my coffee cup down carefully. "My daughter-in-law," I said, and I watched the formality of those words register on her face. "I want to be very clear about something. I have not asked for help managing my affairs. I am not struggling, and I have not indicated, in any conversation, that I am open to transferring control of my finances to anyone. Not informally, and not through paperwork." She blinked. The smile held, but her eyes shifted. "No one said anything about transfer of control. Your husband said joint accounts. His financial advisor suggested joint oversight. You've now mentioned medical decisions." I looked at her evenly. "I'm connecting those dots myself. I'm quite capable of that." A long silence settled between us. The kind that precedes recalibration. "You're misreading us," she said finally. "I hope so," I replied. "I genuinely do." She left 20 minutes later. The lemon cake stayed on the counter. I didn't eat any. Some gifts aren't gifts. That night, after I'd written everything in the legal pad and locked it in the desk drawer, I walked through my house the way I sometimes do when I need to remember what matters. The framed photo of my husband and me in Savannah, 1998. The quilt my mother made from my children's outgrown clothing, now folded over the reading chair. The small bookshelf in the hallway where I keep the novels I've read twice. This was my life, assembled over decades, and it was whole. I was not a problem to be solved. I was a person who had built something, and I was the only one entitled to decide what happened to it. Thursday came. I met with Sandra again. We moved faster than I expected. The trust documents were drafted and signed by Friday afternoon. Every account, every asset, properly structured and protected. Sandra walked me through each page without rushing. When I signed the final document, she looked up. "Prepared," I said. She nodded. That's the right word. I did not tell my son what I had done. I did not argue. I did not distance myself dramatically. I did something my daughter-in-law clearly hadn't anticipated. I became pleasant. When my son called that Sunday, I asked about the grandchildren. I asked about his work. I listened. When he gently circled back to the subject of finances, I said, "I've been thinking about what you said. I want to make sure everything is handled responsibly." A pause. Then relief, almost audible through the phone. "That's all we wanted, Mom." Of course it was. The following weekend, they came together again. My son brought coffee. My daughter-in-law brought the children, which was both a joy and a tactic. It's harder to have difficult conversations with a 6-year-old pulling at your sleeve. My granddaughter sat in my lap and asked about the tomatoes. My grandson tried to teach me a card game he'd invented with rules that changed every 30 seconds. I held them both and felt something solid inside my chest. After the children had been settled with a movie in the living room, my son leaned forward at the kitchen table. He slid a folder toward me. "We had the paperwork drafted," he said. "Just a joint account authorization. Simple. You can review everything." I opened the folder. Read each page calmly. The language was friendly, but the architecture was exactly what Sandra had described. Gradual transfer of decision-making authority dressed in the language of shared management. There was a clause about financial oversight in cases of reduced capacity. I closed the folder. "I'll need to have my attorney review this," I said. My daughter-in-law's expression flickered. It's standard language. Then my attorney won't have any objections, I replied pleasantly. My son frowned. You have an attorney? Everyone should, I said. A silence passed between the three of us that the children, thankfully, didn't notice. We're family, my son said. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard before. Not anger? Anxiety? Yes, I agreed. Which is why this conversation deserves to be done correctly. I held his gaze. For a moment, something shifted in his expression. A flicker of something that might have been recognition. Then, my daughter-in-law touched his arm, and whatever it was closed over again. They left the folder. I put it in the drawer with my legal pad and locked it. That evening, I called Sandra. I told her about the folder. She asked if I'd signed anything. No, good. They may escalate from here, she said. Some families do, when the easy approach doesn't work. I want you to be prepared for that possibility. I told her I already was. The escalation came quietly, the way the worst things often do. The following Monday, my book club gathered at Naomi's house. 8 of us, coffee and novels and the kind of honest disagreement that only happens between people who've known each other long enough not to perform. I'd been looking forward to it, but before I arrived, I got a text from my son. Hope book club goes well. I mentioned to Naomi that you've been having some trouble sleeping. She'll understand if you're not yourself. I stared at that text for a long time. I had not told my son I was having trouble sleeping, because I wasn't. At book club, Naomi did pull me aside. Not unkindly. Your son called earlier. He mentioned you've been under a lot of stress. She looked at me with careful warmth. Are you all right? I'm perfectly well, I said. And I didn't authorize that call. She blinked. He sounded very concerned. I know, I replied. That's the problem. A narrative was being assembled outside of my awareness. Stressed, not sleeping, struggling. These were seeds, small and quiet. And if planted in enough places, they bloom into documentation. That same week, a medical office called to confirm an appointment I hadn't made. Cognitive wellness screening, the receptionist said cheerfully. Routine. Your family arranged it. I canceled it before she finished her sentence. Then I called Sandra. They scheduled a cognitive evaluation for you without consent? She asked. Yes, document it. Call the medical office and make sure your record reflects that you canceled and that the appointment was unauthorized. A pause. Eleanor, this is no longer informal pressure. They're building a paper trail. I understood that. I also understood something else. If they were building a paper trail, they were preparing to present it somewhere. To someone. To a court, perhaps, or to a physician willing to sign off on a capacity assessment arranged by a family member with financial interest. When my son called that evening, I answered calmly. I canceled the appointment, I said, before he could speak. Silence. Mom. It was just a checkup. You don't schedule my medical care, I said. Not without my knowledge, not without my consent. That is not something I will negotiate. His voice tightened. We're concerned about you. You're concerned about access, I replied quietly. Those are different things. A long pause. You're being paranoid. I'm being precise, I said again. And I hung up. I sat in the kitchen for a while after that. The tomatoes on the windowsill were turning red. The crossword was half finished. My life was still intact, but the edges of it were being tested, and I could feel the pressure increasing the way you feel weather changing before you can see it. The next morning, I made a decision I hadn't planned to make so soon. I called a real estate agent, not to panic, not to flee, but because Sandra had said something in our first meeting that had stayed with me like a key not yet used. The most significant protection you can offer yourself is removing the thing they're positioned around. If the house is sold on your terms, to a buyer of your choosing, at a time of your choosing, the conversation changes entirely. I didn't own significant investments. I didn't have the kind of retirement savings that required teams of attorneys to protect. What I had was a 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood where property values had climbed steadily for 15 years. That house was what made me legible to them as a resource. That house was the board they were playing on, so I considered removing it. The agent, a woman named Louise, came on a Wednesday afternoon while my son thought I was at my garden club. She walked through each room with professional detachment, making notes on a small tablet. "Good bones," she said. "The kitchen needs updating, but buyers overlook that for the lot size. It'll move quickly." "How quickly?" I asked. She looked at me over her glasses. "If we price it right and keep it quiet, 3 to 4 weeks? Maybe less." I nodded. I thought for exactly 24 hours. My son called the next evening. His voice had changed again. Harder, more resolved. "We've spoken to someone," he said. "A doctor. He's willing to conduct an informal evaluation, off the record." Off the record. As if that were comforting. "On what basis?" I asked. "Behavioral changes. Resistance to help. Social isolation." I almost laughed. Resistance to a takeover is not behavioral change. Social isolation is not a diagnosis. But in the hands of a document and a cooperative physician, language can become architecture. "I'm not meeting with anyone you've arranged," I said. "Mom." His voice dropped. "If you don't cooperate, we may have no choice but to pursue a formal route." Formal route. The words were careful, but the meaning was plain. Conservatorship. Legal removal of my right to manage my own affairs. I held the phone and felt something steady move through me. Not fear. Clarity. "You'd need grounds," I said. "We're gathering them." The call ended shortly after. I sat at the desk in the hallway and opened my laptop. Not to research attorneys, I already had one. I opened it to send one email. To Louise. "Let's proceed," I wrote. "How soon can we list?" She responded within the hour. "I can have a pre-market offer in 10 days if you want to avoid a public listing." 10 days, I wrote back. Or sooner. I did not sleep much that night. Not from anxiety. From the particular wakefulness that comes when a plan stops being abstract and starts being real. I walked through the house after midnight, not mourning it, taking inventory of what mattered. My husband's woodworking tools in the garage, which I'd already promised to his old friend Gerald. My mother's quilt, a box of letters, the photograph from Savannah. Everything that was truly mine fit into the back of a car. The house was a structure. What I had built inside it was memory. You can carry memory. You cannot carry walls. The offer came in 8 days. Cash buyer, fast close, no contingencies. Louise called while I was transplanting a rosemary cutting on the back porch. "It's a strong offer," she said, significantly over-asking. I went inside, washed my hands, and called Sandra. We reviewed the offer together that afternoon. She walked through the contract, line by line, her voice unhurried and precise. The sale was clean. No legal impediment existed because no petition had been filed. No conservatorship order had been granted. My son had threatened, but not yet acted. Timing, as Sandra had said early on, was everything. "Do you want time to consider?" she asked. "How much time do I have before he could file?" I asked back. She paused. "If he has a physician lined up and moves quickly, possibly 2 weeks, maybe less." I looked at the offer in my hand. Then I said, "Let's sign." We signed on a Friday morning. The conference room was small and bright, and Louise sat across from me with the buyers, a young couple who'd driven in from the coast. They were quiet and respectful, the kind of people who hold doors open without thinking about it. They didn't know my story. They were buying a house on a cul-de-sac near good schools. To them, this was a beginning. To me, it was a rearrangement. Sandra placed each document in front of me in order: deed transfer, settlement statement, title confirmation. I signed each one without hesitation. At the final signature, Louise looked up. "Congratulations," she said. I thanked her and put my pen in my purse. I had already arranged a furnished apartment 2 states south. A small place near a college town with a farmer's market on Saturdays and a library within walking distance. I'd paid 3 months in advance under my own name, no connection to the old address. I had told no one except Patricia, who had promised on her late mother's memory not to say a word. That afternoon, I drove back to the house for the last time. The buyers had agreed to a 4-8-hour grace period before possession. I had 48 hours to walk through a life and decide what to carry forward. I moved through each room the way you move through a museum on its final day, slowly, with full attention. The kitchen where I'd cooked my husband through 2 surgeries. The hallway where my son had stood against the wall every September so I could mark his height until he finally outgrew the door frame at 14. The back porch where the rosemary grew. I cut a small cutting from it and wrapped it in a damp cloth. It fit in the cup holder of the passenger seat. I packed 2 suitcases, not everything, just what was mine in the truest sense. The quilt, the photograph, the letters, the rosemary, a good kitchen knife, my husband's favorite coffee mug with the small chip on the handle that he'd always refused to throw away. My son called while I was loading the car. I answered. "We filed this morning," he said. The words were flat. "The court date will be scheduled within the week." "I see," I replied. "You need to come home, Mom. We need to go over your finances together before this gets complicated." I looked at the loaded trunk. I looked at the rosemary cutting in the cup holder. "There's nothing to go over," I said calmly. "What does that mean?" "I sold the house," I told him. "This morning." The closing was final, at 10:42. The silence on the other end was different from all the silences before it. This one had weight. "You did what?" His voice rose, fractured. "You? That's not you. Can't just—" "The asset no longer exists," I said. "There is nothing to petition for. The sale can be challenged. If you were acting under diminished capacity, I signed with my attorney present, with a licensed agent, with a cash buyer and a clean title. You have no diagnosis. You have no order. You filed too late." I paused. "You are welcome to challenge it. I would encourage you to consult with your own attorney about your chances." My granddaughter's voice surfaced faintly in the background, asking my son a question about dinner. That sound moved through me like something aching and irreplaceable. "You've destroyed everything," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I've protected what I spent a lifetime building." I took one breath. "I'll be in touch when I've settled." I ended the call, placed my phone on the passenger seat, and backed out of the driveway for the last time. The drive south took 11 hours. I stopped once for gas and once for coffee at a rest stop, where a woman at the next table was reading the same novel I had finished last week. I almost said something, then I didn't. Some moments of connection are enough just to witness. I crossed the state line a little past 9 in the evening. The sky was large here, the way skies get when the land flattens out and stops competing with the horizon. Stars I hadn't been able to see from my old neighborhood appeared in the darkness above the highway like something restored. I did not cry. I had not expected to cry, and I didn't. The apartment complex was modest and quiet. A small courtyard, a row of desert plants in clay pots near the entrance, a woman at the front desk who handed me my key without asking any questions I didn't want to answer. The apartment itself was exactly what I had hoped for. 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen, a small balcony facing west. The air smelled of fresh paint, and somewhere nearby, someone was cooking with garlic. I unpacked only what was necessary that first night. The quilt on the bed, my husband's mug on the kitchen counter, the rosemary cutting in a glass of water on the windowsill. I stood in the center of the living room and listened. No footsteps in my hallway. No car pulling into my driveway without warning. No conversations being held about me in rooms I wasn't in. Just quiet, the kind that isn't empty. The kind that's full of belonging. He called the next morning, earlier than I expected. His voice was different, not the measured tone of strategy, not the careful pressure of rehearsed concern. Just tired. The attorney says there's nothing to contest, he said. I know. A silence. Where are you? Somewhere I can breathe, I said. Mom. His voice broke slightly, just a fraction. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I believed him. That was the part that hurt most, that good intentions and harmful behavior can coexist in the same person, in someone you love, and you cannot fix that for them. You can only protect yourself from the consequences. I know you were scared, I said. I know you thought you were helping. I was scared, he admitted. After Dad died, I kept thinking about you alone in that house, and I didn't want to lose you too. Something in my chest softened. Not toward the plan, toward the person. You don't protect someone by removing their authority, I said gently. You protect them by trusting them. He was quiet for a long time. What do I do now? He asked. Be a son, I replied. Not an administrator. 2 weeks passed before he called again. This time it was short, careful, feeling its way forward like a first step on uncertain ground. He asked about the apartment. I told him about the farmer's market on Saturday, about the library 2 blocks over, about the older woman next door who kept herbs in window boxes and had already given me a cutting of lemon thyme to go with my rosemary. He laughed briefly. You're already gardening. I'm always gardening, I said. My granddaughter called on a Tuesday. She asked when I was coming to visit. I told her soon, in a way that was true. I had already looked at flights. My grandson sent me a drawing. A house with a large sun above it and 2 figures in the yard. He had labeled them Grandma and me. I pinned it to the wall above the kitchen counter, between the rosemary and the window. My daughter-in-law did not call. That was fine. Some distances need to be acknowledged before they can be crossed. I was willing to wait. Sandra confirmed in writing that the petition had been formally withdrawn, no pending actions, no medical documentation on file. The sale, as she had predicted, was legally unassailable. I filed her letter in the folder with the trust documents and locked both in the small lockbox I kept under the bed. Then I made coffee in my husband's chipped mug and carried it to the balcony. The morning was cool and bright. The mountains to the west looked painted, flat, and enormous against the pale sky. A hummingbird appeared at the railing, stayed for 3 seconds, and disappeared. My phone had no demands in it. No appointments I hadn't made. No paperwork I hadn't requested. No voices telling me what I needed or when I'd need it. I was 68 years old, and I had just signed over a house, packed 2 suitcases, driven 11 hours south, and started over. Not because I was lost, because I knew exactly where I was going. Freedom does not always arrive with celebration. Sometimes it arrives quietly, on a balcony, with a cup of coffee and the particular understanding that you have refused to disappear on someone else's timeline. My husband used to say that the most dangerous thing a person can do is underestimate a quiet woman. He wasn't wrong. I am not the ending of this story. I am the author of it, and I am still writing. If your family has ever made you feel like a burden or a balance sheet, I want you to know something. You are not a problem to be managed. You are a person with the full right to decide what happens to your own life. Protecting yourself is not selfishness. It is wisdom. What would you have done? Tell me in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you next time.